What's up, guys? This is Chris from DraftDashboard.com. Here are my DFS picks for NBA Sunday, March 14th. These picks apply for DraftKings and FanDuel. Before I get started, please drop a like on this video and hit that red subscribe button and hit that bell icon so you don't miss our new videos. In this video, I'm going to go over my top picks for today's NBA slate. And if you stick around to the very end of this video, we'll use the Draft Dashboard tools to make a DFS lineup using the picks we just made.
Okay guys, we have a 6-game slate tonight, so let's take a look at the point guard position. I like Goran Dragic from the Miami Heat playing the Orlando Magic, who have the 6th worst defense overall, and they give up the absolute most fantasy points to opposing point guards. Goran Dragic has averaged 25.3 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 27 minutes per game with a 26% usage rate. He scored 37, 21, and 18 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 32, 25, and 31 minutes. He's projected at 26.6 fantasy points here tonight, and on FanDuel, that's 5 times value. He's $5,300 FanDuel salary, but he is $900 more on DraftKings, so I prefer that FanDuel price. He's got a great matchup, and he scored 21, 37, 41, 21, and 20 fantasy points in his last 5 games versus the Orlando Magic. So 2 out of those 3 games, he crushed value, and 3 out of those 5 games, he came a little bit short of hitting 5 times value. So I like Goran Dragic here versus the Orlando Magic. Okay, another point guard that I like is Ricky Rubio from the Minnesota Timberwolves playing the Portland Trail Blazers, who have the 8th worst defense overall, and they give up the 2nd most fantasy points to opposing point guards. Ricky Rubio has averaged 23.3 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 26 minutes per game with a 16% usage rate. He scored 30, 26, and 36 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 32, 27, and 24 minutes. He's projected at 24 fantasy points here tonight, and on FanDuel, that's 5 times value. He's $4,800 FanDuel salary, but he's $900 more on DraftKings. So again, I prefer that FanDuel price, but Vegas thinks there's going to be 233.5 points scored in this game, and Ricky Rubio has just absolute fantastic player versus team history here. He scored 30, 37, 37, 38, and 45 fantasy points in his last 5 games versus the Trailblazers. It's a fantastic matchup, and even though this is a back-to-back, I think he makes a great FanDuel play, and I'd even consider playing him on DraftKings. So I like Ricky Rubio here versus the Portland Trailblazers. Okay, a point guard stud that I like here tonight is Trae Young from the Atlanta Hawks playing the Cleveland Cavaliers, who have the 12th worst defense overall, and they give up the 11th most fantasy points to opposing point guards. Trae Young has averaged 44.6 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 35 minutes per game with a 33% usage rate. He scored 42, 49, and 53 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 31, 36, and 34 minutes. He's projected at 44.3 fantasy points here tonight. That's 4.9 times value. He's $9,000 FanDuel salary and $300 more on DraftKings. So this is a back-to-back, but he only played 31 minutes last game, so he should be good to go. And he's got some pretty good player versus team history as well. He scored 52, 33, 51, 61, and 38 fantasy points in his last 5 games versus the Cleveland Cavaliers. So 3 out of those 5 games, he would have been getting you 5 times value or more. So I like Trae Young here versus the Cleveland Cavaliers. Okay, let's take a look at the shooting guard position. I'm going to give you a value play here. I like Nickeil Alexander-Walker from the New Orleans Pelicans playing the LA Clippers, who have a good defense overall, and they've been middle of the pack defending opposing shooting guards. Nickeil Alexander-Walker has averaged 17.3 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 18 minutes per game with a 22% usage rate. But take a look at his last 3 games. He scored 30, 19, and 29 fantasy points in his last 3 games, playing 23, 24, and 23 minutes. He's projected at 20.1 fantasy points here tonight, and on FanDuel, that's 5.7 times value. He's only $3,500 FanDuel salary, and he is $700 more on DraftKings, but Vegas thinks there's going to be 236 points scored in this game, and he scored 50, 25, 15, 5, and 14 fantasy points in his last 5 games versus the Clippers. I think he makes a fantastic FanDuel play, just way too cheap over there on FanDuel. And I think his DraftKings price is just about right as well. So I like Nickeil Alexander-Walker here versus the LA Clippers. Okay, another shooting guard that I like is Paul George from the LA Clippers playing the New Orleans Pelicans, who have the 7th worst defense overall, and they're middle of the pack defending opposing shooting guards. Paul George has averaged 40.7 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 33 minutes per game with a 29% usage rate. He scored 41 and 45 fantasy points in the last 2 games, playing 26 and 38 minutes. He's projected at 40.8 fantasy points here tonight. That's 5.2 times value. He's $7,800 FanDuel salary and $300 more on DraftKings. Now, he scored 43, 42, 38, and 45 fantasy points in his last 4 games versus the Pelicans. He's been playing great basketball this year, and Vegas thinks there's going to be 236 points scored in this game. So this is a great game to stack. So I like Paul George here versus the New Orleans Pelicans.
Before I continue with the picks, I'm excited today because we added a new contest for everyone watching. If you want to enter the drawing for $100 PayPal, all you need to do is like this video, hit that subscribe button, and make a quick comment below to be entered into the drawing. We'll reply to a random comment and let you know that you won, and then we'll send you $100 PayPal. So it's that easy, and we pick a new winner every Saturday and announce them in our video. So get your comment in now so I can add another entry for you.
Another shooting guard that I like is Colin Sexton from the Cleveland Cavaliers playing the Atlanta Hawks, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall, and they give up the 3rd most fantasy points to opposing shooting guards. Colin Sexton has averaged 34.8 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 36 minutes per game with a 28% usage rate. He scored 32, 55, and 55 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 31, 43, and 41 minutes. He's projected at 36.5 fantasy points here tonight. That's 4.7 times value. He's $7,800 FanDuel salary and the same price on DraftKings. He scored 35, 43, 33, 38, and 31 fantasy points in his last 5 games versus the Hawks. So I like this play because he's probably going to get you close to 5 times value, but then he's got that 50 fantasy point upside where he could go out there and crush value. It's a good matchup versus this shooting guard position, so I like Colin Sexton here versus the Atlanta Hawks. Okay, let's take a look at the small forward position. I like Kevin Porter Jr. from the Houston Rockets playing the Boston Celtics, who have a good defense overall, and they've been middle of the pack defending opposing small forwards. Kevin Porter Jr. has averaged 45.3 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 34 minutes per game. He scored 49 and 42 fantasy points in the last 2 games, playing 37 and 29 minutes. He's projected at 45.3 fantasy points here tonight. That's 7.5 times value. Now, just a word of caution here, guys. This is a small sample size, but based on his last 2 games' performance, this is what we're projecting him at. He's been scoring 1.37 fantasy points per minute. Been playing, he played 29 and 37 minutes last game, so he's got some pretty big upside here. He is $6,000 FanDuel salary, but he's $1,000 less on DraftKings. So I love that DraftKings price. It's got to be one of my favorite plays on DraftKings here tonight. So I like Kevin Porter Jr. here versus the Boston Celtics. So I like Kevin Porter Jr. on DraftKings, but if you're playing on FanDuel, take a look at Kenyon Martin Jr. from the Houston Rockets playing the Boston Celtics. Kenyon Martin Jr. has averaged 15.3 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 14 minutes per game. But take a look at his last 2 games. He scored 40 and 31 fantasy points in the last 2 games, playing 28 and 32 minutes. He's projected at 24.3 fantasy points here tonight. That's 6.9 times value. He's only $3,500 FanDuel salary, but he is $1,000 more on DraftKings. So I would play Kenyon Martin Jr. on FanDuel and Kevin Porter Jr. on DraftKings. Also, just keep in mind that Victor Oladipo is going to be playing here tonight. He didn't play last game, so that gave some extra usage to both of these players, but they still have some injuries. PJ Tucker is out, so these guys are both still going to get plenty of minutes. So I like Kenyon Martin Jr. on FanDuel here versus the Boston Celtics. Okay, so another small forward that I like is Jalen Brown from the Boston Celtics playing the Houston Rockets, who have the 4th worst defense overall, and they give up the absolute most fantasy points to opposing small forwards. Jalen Brown has averaged 39.1 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 34 minutes per game with a 30% usage rate. He scored 36, 35, and 29 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 40, 33, and 33 minutes. He's projected at 40.4 fantasy points here tonight. That's 5.3 times value. He's $7,600 FanDuel salary and $600 more on DraftKings. So I like that price on both sites. It's a great matchup in a fast-paced game. So I like Jalen Brown here versus the Houston Rockets. Okay, let's take a look at the power forward position. I was kind of struggling to find a good play here at the power forward position, so I went with John Collins from the Atlanta Hawks playing the Cleveland Cavaliers, who have the 12th worst defense overall, and they give up the 2nd most fantasy points to opposing power forwards. John Collins has averaged 31.8 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 31 minutes per game with a 22% usage rate. He scored 21, 30, and 29 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 27, 28, and 25 minutes. He's projected at 31.1 fantasy points here tonight. That's 5.3 times value. He's only $5,900 FanDuel salary, and he's $500 more on DraftKings. So I love that FanDuel price. Now, he scored 18, 23, 35, 51, and 30 fantasy points in his last 5 games versus the Cleveland Cavaliers. It's a great matchup, and you just got to hope that he scores at least 30 fantasy points for you to get you 5 times value or more. I think he can get it done. So I like John Collins here versus the Cleveland Cavaliers.
Real quick, guys, I got great news. For a limited time, we're offering a full 30-day trial to Draft Dashboard. You can try all of our DFS tools for all sports. You can try the Position Optimizer, where you can see the top players ranked for each position. And we added a new Player Trends tool, where you can see the top salary differences between FanDuel and DraftKings. It's a really good tool to help you pick out value for the site that you're playing on. Oh, and if you're tired of doing research every day, we just added a cheat sheet that shows hand-picked plays for the slate. No confusing stat lines, no headaches, just a simple cheat sheet that shows the absolute best players for your lineups.
Okay, another power forward that I like is Laurie Markaden from the Chicago Bulls playing the Toronto Raptors, who have the 11th worst defense overall, and they give up the 12th most fantasy points to opposing power forwards. Laurie Markaden has averaged 29 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 30 minutes per game with a 23% usage rate. He scored 28 and 30 fantasy points in his last 2 games, playing 33 and 27 minutes. He's projected at 28.8 fantasy points here tonight. That's 4.7 times value. He's 6,100 FanDuel salary and 100 more on DraftKings. Now, Vegas thinks there's going to be 230.5 points scored in this game, so you got a pretty high scoring game here, a fast-paced game. It's a pretty decent matchup. I think he can score you 32 to 35 fantasy points in this one and get you over 5 times value. So I like Laurie Markaden here versus the Toronto Raptors. Okay, moving on to the center position. What a fantastic FanDuel play this is. I like Kelly Olynyk from the Miami Heat playing the Orlando Magic, who have the 6th worst defense overall. And although they've been pretty good against opposing centers, Kelly Olynyk has averaged 23.6 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 27 minutes per game with an 18% usage rate. He scored 30, 38, and 41 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 33, 34, and 36 minutes. He's projected at 25.2 fantasy points here tonight. That's 5.6 times value. He's still only 4,500 FanDuel salary, but he is 1,600 more on DraftKings. So this is a smash FanDuel play for me. And he scored 38, 16, 25, and 24 fantasy points in his last 4 games versus the Magic. But he's been playing really well, playing a ton of minutes. That FanDuel price is just way too low. So I like Kelly Olynyk here versus the Orlando Magic. Another center that I like is Karl Anthony Towns from the Minnesota Timberwolves playing the Portland Trailblazers, who have the 8th worst defense overall, and they give up the 3rd most fantasy points to opposing centers. Karl Anthony Towns has averaged 45.4 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 33 minutes per game with a 28% usage rate. He scored 59, 29, and 35 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 34, 28, and 32 minutes. He's projected at 45.1 fantasy points here tonight. That's 5 times value. He's 9,100 FanDuel salary and the same price on DraftKings. He scored 59 and 42 fantasy points in his last 2 games versus the Trailblazers. And we know Vegas thinks there's going to be 233.5 points scored in this game. Great matchup, high scoring game, fast-paced game. I like the price on both sites. So I like Karl Anthony Towns here versus the Portland Trailblazers. Now, if you're looking for a nice DraftKings play here, kind of a high-risk, high-reward play because you never know how many minutes he's going to play, but he's an absolute point-per-minute monster. I like Robert Williams from the Boston Celtics playing the Houston Rockets, who have the 4th worst defense overall, and they're middle-of-the-pack defending opposing centers. Robert Williams has averaged 22 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 16 minutes per game with a 15% usage rate. He scored 34, 28, and 37 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 16, 23, and 21 minutes. Now he's projected at 25 fantasy points here tonight, and on FanDuel, that's only 4.5 times value because he's 5,600 FanDuel salary, but he's 600 less on DraftKings. So 25 fantasy points on DraftKings would be 5 times value, which he's done 4 out of his last 5 games. He scored way over 25 fantasy points and would have got you 5 times value or more. So this guy, he puts up 1.41 fantasy points per minute. So if he can be out there for 15 to 20 minutes, he's going to hit value. If you get him over 20 minutes, you're going to crush value. So I like Robert Williams as a high-risk, high-reward tournament play on DraftKings here versus the Houston Rockets.
If you want to try all these daily fantasy tools for yourself, click the link in the description below this video or just go to draftdashboard.com. You can use our DFS lineup optimizer to build quality lineups using our picks and your own custom player pool. Click the link in the description below this video and try all these daily fantasy tools right now. Thanks so much for watching. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel and hit that bell icon so you can get instant updates whenever we post a new video. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, please smickety smash that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Oh, and please comment below with your favorite player for this NBA slate. I love to hear what you guys have to think. Thanks again and good luck.